Well, Kamal, thank you for that overly generous introduction. Thank you to everyone on the Making Their Mark Forum team. As someone who has helped organize many events, I know those that run the smoothest, including with impeccable QR codes, are those that have had people working tirelessly with probably too much caffeine to get us to this beautiful place. I also want to thank everyone at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. Thank you for hosting us. Everyone at the DC library system. I spent a lot of time in these libraries as a kid, and so it's really just lovely to be back. And of course, want to thank all the artists who are really the reason that we're here together today. And especially grateful to everyone who has enabled me to spend some time with my beloved, beloved Sarah.
I echo Chelsea's thanks of Kamal Shah, Cecilia, the artist, everyone whose hands have touched this room, allowing us to be together today. And I look out also here at the extraordinary set of not only artists, but leaders, curators, and scholars, and administrators. So many of you have been mentors for me, lights for me. If I called out every name, I would be listing nearly everyone here. But you don't know is that alongside of all of you, for over half my life, I've had this extraordinary friend by my side who has really challenged me productively to think about the public civic work of the narrative-changing acts that all of the artworks that we're celebrating through the Making Their Mark show, exhibit, and exemplify. So, I love you so. So let's begin. I want to start by calling in the ancestors. Be the one group we haven't thanked, and do so because we know that the ancestors guide our path, and we recently have had an opportunity to thank a new ancestor in Claudette Colvin. Her memorial service at Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City was extraordinary, and you were there offering a powerful speech honoring her life, showing the consistent fearlessness and unshakable commitment to equity that I know of you always. And in it, I ask you just to reflect for us here on it, because in it you focus not only on her life, but the model that honoring her in public spaces and in the arts can give us going forward. Can you speak to us more about this?
Well, Sarah, thank you. I'm incredibly grateful to have had just extraordinary teachers as a kid. Before I moved to Washington, D.C., I lived in a place called Little Rock, Arkansas, and I went to a few different elementary schools, and then I went to junior high school at Horseman Junior High School. Horseman Junior High School in a previous life had been Horseman Negro High School. It was the school that the 9 courageous Black students came from to integrate Little Rock Central High School under eventually the watchful eye of the 101st Airborne, deployed by President Eisenhower because of the fierce and violent opposition to the integration of Little Rock Central High School. Needless to say, I've thought about that quite a bit recently, given all of the images out of Minneapolis and elsewhere. My 7th grade history teacher, who also happened to be the football coach, thought that it was really important that we know the history of our school, really important that we know and understand and feel a responsibility to the courage of the Little Rock 9, and also to learn the stories of other young people who were called to bravery when they should have just been learning math and science and history, and maybe also playing on the football team. And so thank you to my 7th grade history teacher for teaching me about Claudette Colvin. Claudette Colvin, who actually was one of the named plaintiffs in Browder v. Gale, which was the Supreme Court decision that rendered segregation on public transportation illegal. Claudette was a 15-year-old student when in 1955, actually in March, so appropriate that we're having this conversation here in March, she stayed seated when she was asked to move. She was pulled off the bus, she was arrested, and she later had to testify at the federal court hearing, and then ultimately stayed through the case when it came just a mile and a half down the road to the Supreme Court. Most students, I would later learn, didn't learn about Claudette Colvin. They learned about Rosa Parks, who 9 months later stayed seated. They didn't learn that Rosa Parks actually had been a mentor to Claudette Colvin. They didn't learn that she was one of the named plaintiffs. They didn't learn that she ultimately, when she was 16, as a new mom, had to come to New York because she wasn't really able to go to school or find a job because of the consistent, persistent, insistent violent harassment that she confronted. So I didn't know how lucky I was to have my 7th grade history teacher until I actually moved to Washington, D.C. And I realized that all of my new friends didn't know these stories that had been so important to what I thought it meant to be a young person in America. Not just a young person in Little Rock, Arkansas. I later reached out to Ms. Colvin. I was lucky enough to really get to know her. I was incredibly honored to be part of trying to help more young people and maybe not so young people know her story. And as Sarah knows, I have been on this just indefatigable, I'm not gonna give up quest so that she's more recognized in the Smithsonian, because right now she has a postage stamp sized moment of recognition. And we owe her so much more, and we owe ourselves so much more. So Sarah, thank you for letting me share just how deeply meaningful it was for me to be part of her memorial service and how deeply responsible I feel to her legacy.
Yeah. I've just learned that she spent a lot of her life in the Bronx in New York, so I think we might, in the room here, have enough of a forum to think about how we can publicly memorialize her there, too. You've all heard Kamal Shah speak about one experience that impacted her, that galvanized a lot of the rationale for why we're here. A young boy stating that he didn't know that women artists could be so good. And it made me think of your commitment to gender and equity through a variety of different issues and forums, but especially through the work of your publication series, She Persisted. I wonder if you have a moment of impact like that, or probably many, and if you could share one with us, and talk to us about the importance of a publication for children like this regarding narrative change.
I think the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves really matter. I think the stories in particular that we tell our children really matter. I'll just say, I go to church every Sunday. I'm a deeply religious person. I every day think, wow, a lot of the people who are speaking from a place of Christianity, they must have heard different stories in Sunday school than I heard. And they're probably sharing different stories with their children than what certainly we read nightly with ours, or those that I know that my children hear on Sunday mornings. It became really important to me when I became a parent, not only of a daughter, but also of a son. And when I really became perceptive to how gendered children's books are, even for those of you who are parents or aunts or uncles, excuse me, I'm just looking mainly at the women or fathers. If you haven't done this, I urge you to go to your family libraries, at home or wherever you may be spending time with the small humans in your life, and look at the books that feature, cows or frogs or ducks or cats or dogs. They too are overwhelmingly male. It's George, it's Frank, it's Frederick, it's Thomas. And so I became quite activated as I was looking to kind of grow our family library, both to be more intentional, to kind of build on what Kamal was saying, and kind of the books that I was buying, the audiobooks that we were listening to on car rides, and also just felt like I really wanted to bring more of the women who've meant so much to me through my teachers, the stories that my parents or my grandparents shared with me, kind of into our home, and then hopefully also into other people's homes. And it's been just an enormous privilege, particularly now that we have a chapter book series, to give a chance to many younger women authors to write about women who've really inspired them kind of through their persistence, but also really just through whatever is exemplar for each of them.
You're making me think of when we first became friends over half a lifetime ago, so long ago, that I was really honored to work on the curatorial team at the Museum of Modern Art. Yeah, you came to visit me and see this show on the retrospective of Elizabeth Murray, who is in the exhibition and became a dear friend, and whose daughter, I think Daisy Holman, is here. Daisy, yes, the extraordinary, where is she? Who leads the foundation now. Elizabeth Murray taught me so much. There are lines, quotes of wisdom that I still think of, but she was frustrated about the description of her work because the description was always about domestic imagery or objects in kitchens, and she said, this is her quote, so I want to read it, Cézanne painted cups and sauces and apples, and no one ever assumed he spent a lot of time in the kitchen. The Cubists painted still lives, but when I paint the still life, the critique of my work is that I'm making this feminist statement about the home. That critique is political. So Elizabeth, we hear you. We are here because of this. And she is very much the embodiment of the tenacity and grit and power of the women you feature in another project with your extraordinary mother, Secretary Clinton, the Book of Gutsy Women, which led to the Apple TV show. So I wonder if you can reflect on the importance that you understand narrative has, not only in terms of vision and what we see, but in terms of format and where we see.
I'm so lucky that she's my friend, aren't I? I really am. I was really blessed to help honor Sarah at the recent Aperture Gala, and there's a photograph of me watching her, and the best description I have, as she's heard me say, is I look like a Care Bear. Like I just look like my heart is like emanating out of my body toward this extraordinary lifelong friend that I'm just so incredibly blessed by. I hadn't heard that quote. Admittedly, when you kind of first started to frame the question, I thought it would be kind of rendered kind of in the, kind of female artist heuristic, which is something I've, thought a lot about as someone who is often called, like a female, academic or a female author or a female activist, or certainly someone who's incredibly, proud to be the daughter of both of my parents, but I'm quite mindful of the different ways in which my mother has been treated, including in the last week. And so I thought that that's where kind of you were going. I have lots of thoughts on that if that's where we go next. But I do think that the home has always been kind of a forum in which somehow we are immediately kind of rendered less than, even if we claim it so centrally. And I think that is embedded in clearly kind of the wisdom that was just kind of transmitted through you. And yet I think, often the more intensity that we kind of inject into trying to kind of turn that on its head, to reclaim it, somehow seems to only be continuing to play on the quote-unquote their field. And I think a lot these days about how to not play on their field. And what we need to do to not only kind of change the narrative, but actually just to overwhelm it with our own stories. And I think that is a more productive, and to kind of build on what Kamal was saying earlier, a more sustainable and durable way to not only effectuate, but then to protect change.
Mm-hmm. Well, you alluded to what you could spend all day talking about, so I think we might want to go there now. As vice chair at the Clinton Foundation, you focus and frame women and equity as a pivotal pillar, right, of the work. making clear, as your mother said in 1995, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Once and for all, well, to make that once and for all, what is the role of narrative in pushing forward on these specific issues? And narrative comes down to even how a picture appears and how works of art transform the stories we tell.
Well, and I think what we ultimately pay attention to, I do think, as Sarah and I have talked about, even this morning, one of the kind of painful geniuses of the current occupant of my former home is his ability to have both a volume and velocity of vile.
Can we just pause on that?
So,
The volume and velocity of bile, yes? Okay, we're going to talk
and
about
I
that.
think, I think then for those of us who don't agree with kind of any individual, policy, proposal, and certainly not with the broader project, it is a challenge, though one I would argue humbly we all must continually accept, to ensure that we are paying attention to both the broader themes and the individual injustices and outrages, and that we are always being mindful of who should be centered in helping us both tell and understand and pay attention to those stories. I did find it reassuring, although I'm sure that the rules of the game will be changed, that there was such a deluge of public comments yesterday on the proposed ballroom to replace the destroyed East Wing that the Planning Commission couldn't actually hold a hearing. Sometimes we too just need to show up in volume. I also am deeply mindful of how I think weaponized relativism is right now. And I think a very dangerous way. Oh yes, it's like terrible what's happening over here, but it's really terrible what's happening over here. Actually, it's just all terrible. And we need to be kind of mindful and working in concert continually on as many fronts as possible. I mean, one of the areas that I'm deeply dedicated to is trying to eliminate child marriage in America. Child marriage is still legal in 34 states. More than 215,000 minors have been married between 2001 and 2023. More than 90% of those marriages occur between a minor girl and an adult man. 10 years ago, though, it was legal in every state. So we are making progress. Why did I start, though, here on child marriage to your question about narrative? Because I had a state legislator say to me, in one of the states where thankfully now we have banned child marriage, no exceptions until 18, but what about Romeo and Juliet? It's like, what? Like, you know how that story ends, right? And we're really referencing a 500-year-old work to justify the ongoing exploitation and dehumanization of girls? It was said so blithely, though, it had never occurred to, I say painfully, her, that maybe that wasn't a salient reference point. We need different stories. And all of you here are better equipped than I am because you are far more creative than I have ever been lucky enough to be, to help in this moment where I think understandably people do feel so super saturated by the vile, to ensure that people still pay attention. Because the statutory rape laws don't exist in a marriage. For a girl to be married in this country, her parents consent on her behalf, effectively trafficking her into marriage, because you can't sign a contract until you're 18. What does that mean? That means you can't actually sign a contract to hire a lawyer to represent you in a divorce. The court can't appoint one on your behalf because you haven't committed a crime. You are the victim of our failure to have protected you in this country. we need better stories to help people understand why all of us should care about this issue. And maybe if you start with Romeo and Juliet, that's not where you're going to wind up.
I want to ask you about the power of vision and narrative and seeing, and flashing back to now just 10 years ago when we launched what became Vision and Justice at the Ford Foundation, an event that was co-hosted by our extraordinary friend and colleague Darren Walker and Agnes Gund. There you were very heavily pregnant to the point where you were kind of on watch. I think maybe you were delivered a few days later. Yeah. You still remember Charlotte, yeah. And there you spoke about the power of James Baldwin's belief about the centrality of the artist to ask critical questions.
The price of the ticket.
The price of the ticket. So, 10 years later, I wonder what's changed for you in seeing the importance of the arts and narrative, and what also began your interest in the power of the artist? And I'm thinking here of the performing arts as well.
Yeah, I think that we are in a more vulnerable place today than we were then.
Yeah.
Partly because of what, at least, what I not affectionately refer to as the forces of darkness are attempting to habituate us into accepting. I do think that is a real difference than where we were 10 years ago. What I think is not different is how many people are in not only defiance of that, but in kind of optimistic affirmation of a different way forward. And I find that incredibly inspiring. And I think that being in real community is really important. And so again, just I'm so thankful to Kamal and Cecilia and everyone who has brought us together. Because the forces of darkness, they get together all the time. They really do. Like, they get together in small groups and large groups. They get together also to talk about arts, narrative, and culture, and to have debate camps. They get together to talk about agriculture policy and tax policy, to talk about getting rid of vaccines, getting rid of fluoride, getting rid of public education, getting rid of public libraries. They get together all the time. I think it's really important that we too are not only an authentic and sincere community, but actual physical community together. And I think that's going to be particularly important this year. And I think that's something, Sarah, that you have always really understood. And you see that evidenced by the most popular class that you teach at Harvard, to all of the people who always show up with you and for you. Because while you earlier kind of thanked everyone who's been kind of your light and mentor, you certainly have been a light and a mentor to so many of us. I think to your second part of the question, I always loved ballet as a kid. My parents have no idea where that came from because neither of them were dancers, but I always felt just especially connected to myself and kind of in kind of particular community kind of through ballet and also other forms of dance. One of the greatest moments of my life when I was a little kid and I met Mikhail Baryshnikov. It always sort of pains my mother to hear that because the same year I also met Geraldine Ferraro, and I was admittedly way more excited to meet Mikhail Baryshnikov. It also was the first fan letter I ever wrote as a kid. The second letter I wrote was actually to President Reagan asking him to not visit a Nazi cemetery on his official state visit in 1985. So I was really into letter writing as a kid. I think, though, Sarah, one of the things that I'm incredibly thankful of to my parents is that I never knew a time without the arts. And we went to the local Arkansas Art Center and saw every exhibit. We went to the local Arkansas Repertory Theater and saw every play that was child appropriate. I went to the ballet. We would go to Memphis, which was like the big city, a little over 2 hours away, when there were kind of seminal exhibits to see there. I also understood that museums were places not only for art also for American history. Right? I went to the Civil Rights Museum. When we came to DC, I went to the Air and Space Museum as a kid, to the Museum of American History. And so my parents, I think, always subtly when I was younger helped me understand that what we hold in reverence and importance from our kind of cultural history, from our political history, our economic history, says a lot about what we think is important in the here and now and the future. I think a lot also these days, about kind of the Orwell quote that the battle for the future runs through the past, and the people who control the present write history. I think about that a lot these days. I also am really grateful that my parents didn't just passively take me. Like, I remember going to see this Monet exhibit with my mom when we were visiting my grandparents in Chicago. I probably was like 6 or 7. And like every few paintings, she would like stop me and be like, "What do you think?" And I remember being like, "Well, there's lots of pink." And she's like, "I didn't ask you what you saw, I asked you what you think." As a parent, I am even more thankful for the ways that my parents parented me, and certainly try to continually build the architecture of my small humans' brains and also their hearts, and to hopefully deeply connect those two together.
Y'all can see why I'm so grateful to have my extraordinary friend in my life. I am, you're making me flash back to many, many different moments in which I had an encounter with the structures of power within museums. We would go to different shows in the UK together, right? And the conversations I had also gave me a sense of who needed to be at the table. So we are today, I think, in a moment where, thanks to every executive order that comes out, we're only reminded of the power of the displays and the narratives that museums contain, that shows contain, that the detonations that come from artistic practice. So I'm increasingly grateful, right, for where we are in that sense. And I'm mindful of just how long we've been on this journey understanding this together. To conclude, and I don't want to have to end, but I guess at some point we have to, I'm thinking back to what Secretary Clinton, your mother, told you. What do you think when you're looking at a work of art? And at that age, you were probably given homework. And in a recent conversation you had with someone we both admire, Heather Cox Richardson, you asked her what she wants our homework to be. She was then, in that answer, offering us the critical capacity to understand our origins, the Declaration of Independence in this nation, and to think now at this current moment where we're being often told the very opposite of what we are seeing, right? These contradictions. What would your homework be for this group regarding the ongoing work about race, gender, and equity in the arts? Just a very small question to end the conversation.
My brain has always remembered dates. I don't really know why, but it's always remembered dates. And this morning I was thinking about something, and then I thought it was accurate, and then I looked it up, and it was. Today's the anniversary of the Dred Scott decision.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's our homework. My dad has this Southern saying that I think is a good segue from that. If you see a frog on a fence post, it didn't get there by accident. We didn't get to this moment by accident. There are people who have very fundamental different values than we have. There are people who are not only comfortable, but grow in confidence because of the erasure. There are people who don't laugh awkwardly at the memes of President and Mrs. Obama as monkeys, or when Carolyn Leavitt from the lectern at the White House justified it by saying, "Well, don't worry, Hillary Clinton's in the same meme as a boar, the president just didn't post it." They don't feel awkward about their enjoyment of that. They revel in it. There are lots of people in this country who seem completely unperturbed by the deaths of women in Georgia and Texas because they were unable to get the medically necessary health care, yes, abortion care, but bluntly just health care to save their lives. They don't seem particularly troubled by that. Like, there was a big study that came out yesterday about the catastrophic effects to future cancer research because of all of the cuts to NIH funding. There are lots of people who think, well, that's the price of their ticket. That is not the world that clearly we want to live in, because we have chosen to be here today in community together. We need our storytellers, you, to not only help us imagine a way out of this moment, to call to our better angels, but also bluntly to be candid about this moment we're in. Because where are the stories of women dying? Where are the stories of the people that have been kicked out of the cancer trials? Where are those stories? You have to help us look unflinchingly and then not feel suspended, but activated. So I humbly request, as someone who's not terribly artistic, that that be your homework, and then you let me know what I can do to help you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, everyone.